He thought my login was the key to my brilliance. What he didn't know was that I had already changed the locks and decided which lies he would proudly present as truth. Tomorrow morning, in front of our most important client, the CEO's son will unveil what he believes is a flawless strategy. Every chart will look confident, every number will seem intentional, and every slide will collapse the moment someone asks the first real question. I'll be sitting in the front row when it happens, watching his certainty evaporate in real time. My name is Cassidy Nolan. I'm 33 years old, a senior data operations lead at our dentist group, one of the largest consulting firms in the city, for 7 years. I've been the quiet architect behind projects that brought in millions. I built forecasting systems executives relied on. I fixed models at midnight so partners could smile at breakfast meetings. My reviews were always glowing precise, dependable, exceptional under pressure, and always the same final sentence: Cassidy needs to work on her executive presence. That's corporate code for she does the work. But we don't see her leading. I've watched junior analysts present my models to the board. I've seen managers repackage my insights with their names stamped on the footer. I learned something early: when you're invisible, you notice everything. That's how I noticed Evan Hale, 27, business school graduate, expensive suit, expensive watch, effortless confidence. Evan had exactly one qualification that mattered more than experience, more than results, more than competence. He was the CEO's son. When Evan joined our dentists, it wasn't through HR. It was announced at a Monday leadership meeting. My son will be taking a strategic role on one of our most critical accounts. The CEO said proudly. That account was Northbridge Retail, a contract big enough to make or break careers. From his first week, Evan didn't ask. He demanded, "Send me the projections. I need the churn analysis." And when he forwarded my work, my name disappeared. Then, one Thursday evening, just before 5, he walked into my office without knocking. "I need your login credentials," he said, like it was already his. I told him those were working files, not client-ready. He smiled. "Relax. I know what I'm doing." That was the moment I stopped protecting my work and started designing a test he wouldn't pass. That night, I created 2 folders, one real, one irresistible, and when his email came, "Send your credentials, ASAP," I sent them. The trap was set. If you've had a long, tiring day. I hope this story gives you a quiet space to pause and let the noise fade for a moment. Where are you listening from right now? I'd truly love to hear. Stay with me. And if this story resonates, subscribing means you won't miss what happens next, because this is where the real unraveling begins. The morning after I sent Evan my login, the office felt different. Not louder, just more focused on him. People leaned in when he spoke, laughed at jokes that barely qualified as jokes, nodded along to insights that weren't his. Evan moved through the floor like someone who had already decided the ending and was just waiting for the applause. I watched from my desk, unnoticed. That had always been my advantage. Being invisible teaches you timing, it teaches you restraint, and most importantly, it teaches you how people behave when they think no one is watching. Evan wasted no time. Within hours, he was inside the folder I'd prepared, the one labeled cleanly, professionally, and just vague enough to invite confidence. The dummy files were elegant, charts flowed, colors were consistent, assumptions were written with the right amount of authority and just enough ambiguity to discourage questions. To someone who didn't understand the machinery beneath the surface, it looked brilliant. To someone who did, it was a minefield. That afternoon, Evan presented his early insights in an internal sync. I recognized every slide, my formatting, my structure, my poisoned formulas. He spoke smoothly, confidently, as if the numbers had revealed themselves to him personally. "Our initial findings suggest a significant shift in customer behavior," he said, gesturing to a steep curve on the screen. "This opens a rare opportunity for Northbridge to push aggressively in the next quarter." Across the table, a senior analyst hesitated. "That growth rate feels optimistic." Evan smiled, the kind of smile that shuts rooms down. Data often challenges our instincts. He replied, "That's why they brought me in." No one pushed back. I noted the time, the slide, the claim. Quietly, I saved a screenshot. Over the next 2 weeks, he did exactly what I expected. He forwarded my files to partners with his name in the header. He renamed folders. He stripped metadata without realizing what still remained underneath. Every access, every download, every rename quietly logged itself in the background. He even stopped pretending I was part of the process. Handle the back end. He'd write, "Just make it clean." I did, immaculately. One afternoon in the break room, I overheard him telling 2 junior associates, "This account is easy. Northbridge just needs someone bold enough to tell them the truth." Bold. That was his word for careless. What Evan didn't understand was Northbridge's leadership. Their CFO was known for dismantling weak analysis in minutes. Their CEO didn't care about confidence, he cared about coherence. And the numbers Evan was building his reputation on wouldn't survive their first serious question. I wasn't reckless. I kept the real work sealed away, correct models, clean assumptions, documented logic, every version time-stamped, if anyone ever asked. I could trace every step back to its origin. Late one evening, the CEO passed my office and nodded approvingly. "Still grinding," he said. "That's why we trust you with the details." I smiled politely as he walked on. Tomorrow, those details would decide everything, and Evan had no idea he was already standing on the wrong side of them. By the 3rd week, Evan had stopped checking anything at all. That was the real tell. People who understand their work double-check. People who steal it assume confidence is enough. Evan had fully crossed into the second category. He walked the floor like a victory lap was already underway, dropping phrases like "final deck" and "board ready" into conversations that didn't require them. Meanwhile, I was building something he never considered insurance. Every real model lived in a secured directory only I could access. Each file carried a clean version history, documented assumptions, and internal notes written for someone who actually understood the math. I embedded timestamps, cross-references, and quiet markers that established authorship without announcing it. Nothing dramatic, just undeniable at the same time. I watched Evan sink deeper into the illusion. In one prep meeting, he claimed Northbridge could offset seasonal slowdowns by reallocating inventory based on emerging travel-adjacent behavior. It sounded impressive. It was nonsense. The coefficients he was using belonged to a completely different region. Anyone paying attention would catch it immediately. No one did. That was the problem with hierarchy. It trains people to listen upward instead of thinking sideways. Late one afternoon, a colleague from analytics pulled me aside. "Some of Evan's numbers feel off," she whispered. "Did you see the retention slide I did?" I said evenly. "Let's see how it plays out." She looked uncomfortable. I didn't blame her. Speaking up in the wrong room could end a career. I had learned that lesson years ago. That was why I didn't raise my voice. I raised documentation, every night. I logged what Evan presented, claims, slides, phrases, each one quietly tied back to the files he'd accessed. The trail grew longer, clearer. He was doing the work for me, cementing his ownership of conclusions that would not survive scrutiny. 2 days before the client presentation, HR sent a calendar reminder: Northbridge Executive Review, Monday, 9 sharp. Evan forwarded it to me with a single line: "Be there in case they ask technical questions." Not if, in case, I replied. Of course, that weekend. I didn't touch the dummy files. I didn't need to. Evan had already committed to them publicly. Changing course now would mean admitting uncertainty, and that wasn't in his vocabulary. Sunday night, an email came in from the CEO himself. "Cassidy, please bring any supporting documentation to tomorrow's meeting. Evan mentioned you manage the back-end files." I stared at the screen for a long moment. So that was the plan, if things went wrong. The blame would slide quietly in my direction. Not aggressively, just enough. I closed my laptop and opened the folder I'd prepared days ago. Inside were two stories. One Evan believed in, and one that could stand up in any room. I placed the folder by the door, set my alarm, and turned off the light. Tomorrow, someone would finally ask the right question, and when they did, I would already have the answer. Monday morning arrived without drama. That was the strange part. The office lobby buzzed with the usual performance-polished shoes, rehearsed smiles, people pretending they weren't nervous. Evan showed up exactly on time, perfectly tailored suit, confidence dialed just high enough to feel inevitable. He barely acknowledged me as we stepped into the elevator together. "Big day," he said to no one in particular. I nodded and kept my eyes on the floor numbers climbing. I didn't need to look at him to know how this would go. I'd already seen the ending in the data. The Northbridge boardroom sat on the top floor, all glass and steel, designed to make people feel small if they weren't prepared. Executives filed in one by one. Their CFO, Marianne Kessler, calm and sharp-eyed. Their CEO, Richard Bowen, quiet, observant. The kind of man who let others speak first so he could measure the quality of their thinking. Evan took the front of the room like it belonged to him. He connected his laptop, adjusted his tie, and launched into the deck with practiced ease. Market overview, competitive pressure, opportunity framing. It was smooth, almost impressive if you didn't know what was underneath. I sat in the front row, my folder closed on the table. Hands folded. I wasn't anxious. I felt oddly calm, like someone watching weather roll in from a distance. Then Evan reached the first real slide. Projected quarterly growth surged upward in a clean, confident arc. Too clean. Marianne leaned back slightly. "Can you walk me through the assumptions behind that fourth quarter acceleration?" Her tone wasn't confrontational. It was surgical. Evan didn't hesitate. "We've identified underutilized segments and seasonal behavior shifts that Northbridge hasn't fully capitalized on yet." Seasonal behavior shifts. The phrase sounded strong. It meant nothing. Richard tilted his head. "Which segment specifically?" Evan clicked to the next slide. Segmentation clusters bloomed across the screen. Retirees highlighted as a primary growth driver. Marianne glanced down at her tablet, then back up. "That's interesting. Our last 3 years show 75% of revenue coming from customers under 35. Evan smiled. "That's exactly why this opportunity is so compelling. The market is changing faster than internal data reflects." There it was, the first fracture. Marianne nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the slide. "Possibly," she said, "but I'm curious, why does this model apply a regional coefficient labeled coastal travel to Midwest stores?" The room went quiet. Evan blinked once. "That's a normalization artifact," he said quickly. "It doesn't affect the core logic." Marianne didn't respond immediately. She tapped her screen once. "It does when it feeds into inventory weighting." A pause, the kind that stretches. I felt the shift, then not panic, not chaos, just a subtle realignment in the room. Attention pulling away from Evan and toward the numbers themselves. Evan cleared his throat and advanced the slide. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the next question would be worse. Don't judge too quickly, because here comes the biggest twist. Evan tried to recover by moving faster. That was always his instinct, outrun the discomfort before it could catch up. He clicked through slides with a practiced rhythm, talking smoothly, confidently, as if momentum alone could hold the room together. Churn analysis came next. A clean bar chart appeared, stark and alarming. Premium customer retention sat dangerously low, highlighted in red. Evan's voice sharpened with urgency. "This is where Northbridge is leaking value. High-tier customers are disengaging at a rate that requires immediate intervention." Marianne didn't interrupt him. She simply leaned forward. "Can you clarify how you're defining churn in this model?" she asked. Evan nodded quickly. "We applied a stricter cohort window to isolate true loss. It exposes risks that broader definitions tend to hide. Richard folded his hands. Stricter how Evan hesitated just long enough to be noticeable. Adjusted denominator, he said, to avoid noise. Marianne turned her tablet toward the screen. Because according to this, you're counting retained customers as losses. The room froze. Evan laughed lightly, as if she'd misunderstood. No, that's not correct. She tapped once. This cell flags retained accounts as churn. Your numerator and denominator are inverted. Silence expanded outward from the table. Evan's jaw tightened. That's a presentation artifact, he said. The underlying math is sound. Richard didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Then walk us through it. Evan opened his mouth, closed it, clicked back 2 slides, then forward again. As if the answer might appear if he looked hard enough. It didn't. I stayed still. The folder on the table in front of me felt heavier now. Like gravity had shifted. Marianne glanced at me for the first time. Just a flicker, a question without words. Evan rushed ahead. Inventory optimization, seasonal shifts, aggressive reallocations. Each slide leaned on assumptions that only worked if no one questioned them. But they were questioning now. Not aggressively, methodically. Why is winter demand peaking in December here? Richard asked calmly. Evan spoke faster. Promotional elasticity combined with lifestyle migration. Marianne didn't look up. Your regional footfall data references a zone that doesn't operate in our network. Another pause. Another quiet note taken. Evan's confidence didn't vanish all at once. It fractured, small cracks appearing in his voice, his posture, the way his eyes flicked between faces, looking for approval that no longer came. He glanced toward the side of the room, toward where the CEO sat. There was no rescue waiting there. Richard leaned back. Let's pause here, he said. I want to understand where these assumptions originated. He turned his gaze not to Evan. To me, Cassidy, he said evenly. You've been quiet. Is there anything you'd like to add? Every head turned. I felt years of invisibility compress into a single moment. Then I placed my hand on the folder. Yes, I said calmly. There is. And that was when Evan finally realized the room was no longer his. I didn't rush to the front. I didn't apologize for interrupting. I simply stood, opened my folder, and waited until the room settled again. May I connect? I asked. Richard nodded once. Evan stepped aside without looking at me. His confidence finally reduced to posture alone. I connected my laptop. The screen changed. The dramatic spikes disappeared, replaced by something far less exciting and far more honest. This projection, I began, is based on 32 quarters of Northbridge's historical performance, segmented by region and climate band. My voice surprised me, steady, unhurried. Seasonality is treated separately from promotions. Geography is not normalized across zones that don't operate in your network. I clicked to the next slide. A modest curve appeared. 8% growth in the third quarter, tapering to 5% in the fourth, with clear confidence intervals and notes in the margins. Marianne leaned in. That aligns with what we've been seeing. It should, I said. Your winter footfall declines consistently after October in the Midwest. Any model showing the fourth quarter outperforming the third is either mixing regions or misapplying coefficients. No one interrupted. The room had shifted from performance to listening. I moved to segmentation. Primary revenue remains customers 25 to 34, 76% last year, trending upward this quarter. The alternative model used demographic logic that Northbridge retired years ago. Richard nodded slowly. Inventory came next. Outerwear weighting remains highest from December through February. The recommendation to shift into resort categories in winter came from a regional coefficient tied to coastal travel. That coefficient doesn't belong here. Marianne's pen paused, then lowered. Thank you, she said quietly. Finally! Retention. Premium customer retention is 82%. The other analysis inverted the calculation. Retained accounts were flagged as losses. Evan shifted beside me. I didn't look at him. These, I said, are the finalized models. Fully documented. Auditable. Built to withstand questions. Richard tapped the table once. How did we end up seeing the other version? I didn't dramatize it. I didn't accuse. I opened the folder and slid a page forward. Those were preliminary drafts. I said, marked clearly as internal. They were accessed, renamed, and presented as final. Here are the version histories and access logs. The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't tension. It was clarity. Evan spoke quickly. Cassidy manages the back end. I asked for the final files. The logs show 41 downloads from the preliminary directory. I replied evenly. All after the final versions were secured. Each access is time-stamped. Richard exhaled once, slow and controlled. He looked at Marianne. She nodded. Let's take 10 minutes. He said, Cassidy, please stay. Chairs moved, papers rustled. Evan didn't meet my eyes as he left the room. When the door closed, Marianne turned to me. Can you lead this engagement going forward? Yes, I said. With clear ownership, direct access to your data, and defined sign-off. Richard nodded. Good. As the room emptied, I felt something unfamiliar settle in, not triumph, not relief, alignment, for the first time. The truth wasn't fighting uphill. If you leave here, you will miss the most important thing. The 10 minutes passed more slowly than I expected. I remained seated at the table, hands folded, eyes on the skyline beyond the glass. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had happened. Inside, a quiet reordering was already underway. When the door opened again, Richard and Marianne returned first. Their expressions were composed, professional. Behind them came the CEO, followed by Evan. He looked smaller somehow, not defeated, just stripped of momentum. Richard didn't waste time. We're continuing the engagement under revised leadership, he said evenly. Cassidy will lead the project effective immediately. Evan inhaled sharply. With respect, he began. Changing leadership midstream creates confusion for the client. Richard's tone stayed calm. What creates confusion is unreliable analysis, Marianne added. We need work we can defend. Cassidy has demonstrated that. The CEO shifted beside his son. Careful, controlled. Our dentist will manage the internal transition. He said, Our priority is the client. That was it. No argument, no ceremony. The meeting moved on to logistics timelines. Access. Deliverables. I outlined the recovery plan, clearly rebuild the churn model, correct regional weighting, establish version controls and approval gates. Richard approved each step without hesitation. When it ended, Evan left the room without a word. I didn't follow him. I didn't need to. Back at our dentist's. The shift was immediate but quiet. Whispers traveled faster than emails. By mid-afternoon, an internal message went out. Evan Hale would be stepping back from client-facing responsibilities, effective immediately. No explanation, no commentary, just a line break and a signature. HR called me into a glass room and turned on a recorder. I answered with dates, folders, access logs, no adjectives, no speculation. When they asked if I wanted to file a complaint, I shook my head. I want process, I said. Clear ownership, clear accountability. They nodded. That was language they understood. By evening, Evan's office was dark. His calendar blocks disappeared from shared view. Someone removed his name from the project distribution list. The firm didn't announce consequences. It never does. It simply rearranges gravity. I gathered my new team before the day ended. People who asked questions, people who fixed problems quietly. I laid out the rules, version control, documented assumptions. No slide without a model behind it. No one argued. That night, I stayed late, not out of habit, but intention. I opened a fresh file and typed the first line of the new plan. Assumptions we can defend, for the first time. No one else would be presenting my work. And that changed everything. The weeks that followed didn't feel dramatic. They felt precise. That's how real consequences usually arrive, not with shouting, but with recalibration. Northbridge moved fast once the noise was gone. Daily working sessions replaced polished status updates. Their finance and operations teams joined ours directly. Questions asked in plain language, answers expected to hold. I rebuilt the models from the foundation up, narrating assumptions as I went, so nothing lived in the shadows again. People listened. By the end of the second week, the numbers started lining up with reality instead of ambition. Growth projections tightened. Inventory flow smoothed. A pilot adjustment in 6 Midwest stores reduced overstock without triggering shortages. Small wins, verifiable wins. Marianne sent a short message late one evening. This is the first time a consulting team has made our data feel understood. I read it twice, then saved it not for validation, but as a marker, proof of alignment, inside Ardentis. The atmosphere shifted in subtler ways. Meetings ran longer because people asked follow-up questions. Junior analysts spoke more carefully, but also more confidently. Slides started including footnotes again. Someone quietly reintroduced version tracking across shared drives. No announcement explained the change. It simply happened. Evan remained absent. His name stopped appearing altogether. Weeks later, an internal note mentioned he was exploring opportunities outside the firm. Corporate language for a door that had already closed. The CEO called me into his office on a gray Tuesday afternoon. No preamble. You handled that situation with restraint. He said, I want you to formalize what you built across all accounts. I didn't accept immediately. I asked questions, authority, enforcement, consequences when process was ignored. He listened. That mattered more than the offer itself. Write it, he said finally. We'll stand behind it, for years. I'd been careful not to want too much, wanting invited disappointment. But this wasn't about recognition. It was about structure, about making sure no one else had to build safety nets in silence. That night, I stayed late again. The office was quiet, familiar. I drafted guidelines, clear ownership, immutable audit trails, no presentation without traceable source logic, boring rules, necessary ones. As I packed up to leave, I noticed something I hadn't before. My name on the door. Temporary. Maybe, but visible. I shut off the lights and paused. Hand on the frame. Invisibility had taught me how systems break. Visibility, I was learning, meant deciding how they hold. And tomorrow, the real work would begin. Success didn't announce itself. It settled in quietly. Like a system running without alerts. Northbridge's quarterly review came and went without surprises. The numbers landed exactly where we said they would. No heroic spikes, no last-minute explanations. Just outcomes tied cleanly to decisions everyone understood. Richard sent a brief note afterward, thanking the team for clarity and discipline. In that order, at Ardentis. My role became permanent before anyone said the word. My calendar filled with standing reviews. Not fire drills. People came to meetings prepared. They asked better questions. When something didn't make sense, they stopped and fixed it instead of smoothing it over. That change mattered more than any title. A month later, HR closed the internal review. No findings were shared publicly. There never are. But the process I'd written became policy quietly embedded into onboarding, approvals, and client delivery. New hires learned it without knowing why it existed. That was the point. Evan's name surfaced once more. In an email forwarded too many times, he'd joined a smaller firm, role unspecified. I read it without satisfaction or bitterness. What happened to him wasn't the story. What happened to the work was... One evening, long after most of the floor had emptied, I sat alone reviewing a model that didn't need fixing. That was new too. I closed my laptop and looked around the office I'd spent years passing through unnoticed. I thought about how close I'd come to disappearing entirely, how easy it would have been to hand over the login and let the mess unfold without a record, how tempting it would have been to walk away when the blame started to shift. Instead, I'd stayed. Not loudly, not visibly, just thoroughly. The truth doesn't need protection if it's built properly. It just needs patience. Before leaving, I opened a new document for the next engagement and typed the header the same way I always did. Clear assumptions, defined ownership, audit trail intact, nothing dramatic, everything defensible. As I shut down for the night, I realized something else had changed. I no longer felt the urge to prove my worth. The systems did that now. They spoke when I didn't have to. And that, I learned, is the difference between being seen and being necessary. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges, new personalities, new pressure. But the locks were already in place. I didn't think about Evan the morning I received the final Northbridge report. I thought about the work. The numbers matched the forecast within a narrow margin. Inventory flow stabilized. Customer retention held steady through the winter months. No emergency calls, no frantic late-night revisions. The absence of chaos felt almost unfamiliar. That was when I knew the story was over. Not because someone fell, but because something finally held. A week later, I walked into the office earlier than usual. The building was quiet, the way it had been on that Friday before everything changed. I passed the conference rooms, the break area, the long hallway that used to feel like a corridor of borrowed space. When I reached my office, I paused. The nameplate on the door was no longer temporary. Inside, the team chart was pinned neatly on the wall. Real names, clear ownership, no ambiguity. The systems we'd built were running without my constant supervision now, which was the point. Good systems don't depend on heroes. They depend on clarity. Mid-morning, the CEO stopped by. No announcement, no entourage. "You were right," he said. "About process, about documentation." I nodded. There was nothing else to add. Before he left, he hesitated. "If you'd handled this differently, more aggressively, it would have ended louder." "Yes," I said, and weaker. He smiled once, briefly, then left. That afternoon, I received a short email from Northbridge's CFO. "We're extending the engagement. Same structure, same standards." I replied with one line, "Confirmed." When the day wound down, I shut my laptop and stayed seated for a moment. I thought about how easily this could have gone another way, about how often competence is mistaken for compliance, about how many people are told to be patient when what they really need is a lock. I didn't destroy anyone. I didn't expose secrets or raise my voice. I simply decided that access would no longer mean entitlement. That's the part people miss. Power isn't in taking something back. It's in deciding what stays protected. As I left the office, the lights dimmed automatically behind me. The building settled into its night rhythm. Everything where it belonged. Tomorrow, someone else would log in, but not without permission, and not without consequence. Because some doors don't need to be slammed. They just need to stay closed. Sometimes the strongest response isn't anger or revenge. It's clarity. This story reminded me that protecting your work, documenting your value, and staying calm under pressure can quietly change everything. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You just need to be prepared. As you listened, how did this story make you feel? Was there a moment that stayed with you, or something it brought back from your own experience? Let me know where you're listening from. And if this resonated with you, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments. Like the video, pass it along to someone who might need it, and subscribe so we can keep exploring stories like this together. 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 Stories like this together.